one-step addition equations. Well, this is truly algebra. And algebra is a great thing. It's really pretty fun. It's pretty interesting. Algebra is always doing the opposite. It's equals the opposite. So when I teach algebra or when I express algebra, I say, hey, algebra is always about reversing what you've done. It's about doing the opposite. It's about doing the opposite to the other side. For instance, let me give you a math problem, for instance. If I said, hey, you have some amount of money and I gave you $4 more. Now you have $10. If I asked you, well, how much money did you have before? Sometimes some people will say they start guessing. They'll say, well, it looks like a 7 plus a 4 would give me 10. But the thing is algebra really isn't about guessing. So what it is it's about reversing things. Let me show you what I mean. If you had some money and I gave you 4, now you have 10, doesn't it make sense that if you really just had the 10 and you took back the 4, you just reversed it? Wouldn't that tell you what that number was? That's algebra. Algebra says just reverse what you did to the answer and you'll know what that missing number was. Let me show you what I mean. Look at this guy over here. This guy says, I have H, and I'm adding 22 to it. Now that gives me 67. Well, if I had something and I added 22 to get 67, doesn't it make sense that if you just take the 22 back from the 67, that you would actually know what that number was? And the answer is yeah. That would be actually, what is that, a 45? That's what it really was. And if you wanted to check, you could. You could say, well, is 45 plus 22 67? And it sure as heck is. So this is what algebra does. Now, sometimes I've heard in other things where they try to start you with guessing. Oh, I can't spell. And I'm not into that. I'm really into let's learn what algebra is. Okay. So a couple of things to be aware of when you're doing algebra. Okay. You'll notice a couple of ways that I rewrote. Did you notice that as I rewrote, I moved down? I was writing in a downward fashion. This is kind of formula-based solving, where your equation is actually, as you change things, moves in a downward fashion. Did you notice that my equals were aligned every time I wrote a new line of math? This is kind of what you want to do and emulate. Did you notice that the H, as it started on the right or on the left, it stayed on the left of the equal sign? This is something else you'll want to try to emulate. Okay, let's try again. Look at this one. It says R plus 32 is equal to 64. But if I had some money and I added 32 to it, now I have 64. Doesn't it make sense that if I just took the 32 back from 64, I would get it? Let's find out. Well, if it would leave me with 32. Is 32 plus 32 64? Yes. Now, one of the things to keep in mind as you're doing this, you're going to want to notice that you're always doing the opposite. Okay? If I'm adding 32 on the left, do you see that? I better be subtracting 32 from the right. So you want to make sure that whatever you're doing, the opposite, you need to make sure it is the opposite operation, that I'm doing the opposite operator. We have to make sure we're doing that. You'll notice that I've done it here, where I added 22, and I made sure on the left, and I made sure that I was subtracting 22 on the right. On this side, I was adding 4 on the left, and I made sure I was subtracting 4 on the right. Now, sometimes students get a little confused when they get down to these equations here, where it really freaks them out to see the variable actually to the right side of the equal sign. You got to try to understand that this is going to be common too. And you really don't want to get into the habit of reversing this, where you're writing it again by flipping all the numbers, where now the Q is on the left side of the equal sign. Please don't do that. It's a very bad habit. Okay? Though it can be done, it's really a bad habit. It can cause a lot of issues later on. So let's demonstrate. If I have Q and I add 23 to it to get negative 16, doesn't it make sense that if I just subtracted 23 from the other side, I would get that? Let's find out. If I have negative 16 and I subtract 23, am I going to get Q? Well, 16, negative 16, take another 23 is going to leave me a negative 39. You'll notice that as I wrote, do you notice that my Q, it stayed on the right side of the equal sign? Do you also see that here we go, that if I added 23 on the right, I did the opposite of subtracting 23 of the left? I want to make sure that that's how you're solving. Try to emulate what I'm doing, and it'll make it a little easier as things get a little more complicated.